My name is Cathy Alpin, and I was 29 years old when my fall began. I felt that 2002 was going to be our year. My husband Fred and I were building our dream home, and despite the problems with inspectors, I was excited at the prospect of moving into our new home that summer. Fred handled the nuisance issues with the inspector and our contractor without much help from me. I was busy with events going on at DC&H where I was working. At that time, I had already been the head of DC&H's accounting department for 2 years and had 20 accountants reporting to me. DC&H was experiencing 2 years of record growth in mergers and acquisitions, which provided me with very generous year-end bonuses. Problems arose in January when serious management problems were discovered in DC&H's Indianapolis offices. An internal audit conducted by my department found irregularities in the revenue reported by the sales department. Fourth quarter sales figures were inflated to justify commission bonuses paid to the sales manager, office manager, and several other employees. I wasn't sure if the fact that I was leading the audit team would protect me from the coming purge. The proverbial shit hit the fan on February 3rd. A team from corporate headquarters in New York City, consisting of the company's vice president, the head of corporate security, and a team of auditors, came to our office. I spent the day with the corporate auditors going over the results of the audit, and by the end of the day, the office manager, the sales manager, and 2 other lower-level managers had been escorted out of the building by the head of corporate security. I felt sorry for those who were fired, but I was more concerned about what was going to happen to me. I was told that at the end of my meeting with the corporate audit team, I was to meet with the vice president who headed the team that was investigating the problems in our office. I feared that all the managers in the office had been tainted by the actions of a few people, and fully expected that meeting with the vice president would be the end of my career at DC&H. At 6 o'clock that evening, I finished my work with the auditors and was then escorted to a conference room where Jack Hansen, vice president of corporate sales, was waiting for me. "Please come in, Mrs. Alpin," Mr. Hansen said. "Grab yourself a cup of coffee or soda if you'd like, and have a seat. It won't take long. It's been a long day, and I'm sure you're anxious to get home." Jack Hansen was a very substantial man of 46. He was small in stature, slender, and apparently in excellent physical shape. His steely gray eyes fixed on me as I sat down at the table across from him. I could feel my heart pounding, waiting to hear what he was going to say to me. "I imagine it was quite a traumatic experience for you," he said. "Firing 4 people and knowing that your audit was to blame. You should be reassured that the corporate auditors already had suspicions about the fourth quarter report. If you didn't find a problem in your audit, they would have. The difference is that if the corporation had found it, you would have been let go with the rest of them." I felt like I should say something, but couldn't think of anything, so I stayed silent. "What I'm trying to say is that you are not responsible for what happened. Those people would have lost their jobs anyway, and the only thing your inspection did was save your job," he said. "By the way, those 4 who were let go were told they were caught by corporate accounting, so you don't have to worry about them being mad at you." "Thanks. I was worried about that," I said. I was getting a little relieved. I wasn't going to lose my job, and that was good to know, but I was still a little uncomfortable sitting alone with Mr. Hansen. "Mrs. Alpin, may I call you Cathy?" "Yes." "Good. Cathy, in preparation for today, I've spent the last 2 weeks going through the personnel files of everyone in this office. First, I had to determine who and how many were involved in false sales reporting. Second, I had to make a decision on which employees to keep after the reorganization. I must say that I was very impressed with your personnel file. You have an excellent track record and an impressive resume. I must say that I am a little surprised to find that an MBA graduate of the Wharton School of Pennsylvania is working as a first-level accounting manager. When I first graduated 6 years ago, there were no good MBA jobs in Indianapolis," I said. "I worked at several other companies before I got this job 2 years ago." "Why didn't you go to another company? I'm sure with a Wharton degree, you could have gotten a much better job elsewhere," he said. "My husband worked for Independent Investigations Corporation, IQYC, in Indianapolis before we got married," I said. "He was doing well and didn't want to leave Indianapolis. I thought I'd eventually find a good job here. What is IIC? IIC provides investigative services to the big insurance companies. They investigate insurance claims for fraud, recover stolen property, that sort of thing, I said. Interesting. Are you and your husband going to be staying in the area for a while? He asked. Yes. We're building a house right now and plan to stay in Indianapolis, I replied. Good. I plan to move my office from New York to Indianapolis and will be looking for people I can count on to help get the office back to normal. If you become a member of my team, I can promise you will be rewarded for your efforts, he said. May I ask what kind of reward you're talking about? Think a high position in a corporation, a large salary, bonuses and stock options, he said. I think you're beginning to see what we're talking about. My stomach started doing somersaults and I felt my face redden. Was he just teasing me, or could this really be happening? I chose to believe that it really could happen. What do I have to do to become a member of your team? Nothing right now. First, we have to get the office through this transition period, and then we can focus on other things, he said. I have to ask you not to tell anyone about this conversation. I wouldn't want anyone else to know what I'm telling you. Let me tell you that I have big plans for this corporation, and this office will be the key to my success. If you will work with me and help me achieve my goals, I will take you with me. We talked some more about personal things. I told him about Fred and the house we were building, but he told me almost nothing about himself. By the time I went home, I felt very comfortable with Mr. Hansen. On the way home, I was so excited that I almost couldn't remember the way. It seemed like I was just suddenly home. I couldn't wait to get into the house to tell Fred about what had happened at work and about meeting Mr. Hansen. When I walked into the house, Fred was in the kitchen making dinner, which meant I would have to clean up afterward, but I was so happy I didn't care. So, how did it go today? Asked Fred. Not too bad, I replied. I tried not to smile, but Fred saw right through me. From the look on your face, it went really well, he said. I spent the next 10 minutes telling Fred about the layoffs and my all-day meeting with the corporate auditors. After the meeting with the auditors, I had a meeting with Jack Hansen. He was a vice president who came in with the auditors to investigate, I said. I was sure he was going to fire me, but instead he told me that he thought I was doing a good job. He said that if I stayed with the company, I could be promoted quickly. I didn't know why, but I left out the part about needing to be on Mr. Hansen's team and all of his comments about how high I could go. Then I thought it was because Mr. Hansen told me not to tell anyone about what he told me, but Fred was my husband, and I had to tell him. That's great, Cathy, Fred said. I'm very proud of you, and I always knew your talent and hard work ethic would be noticed. What do you say we leave this dinner and go somewhere to celebrate? Celebrate what? The fact that I didn't get fired? Said I. For starters, and then we can celebrate that the vice president of the company recognized your talents and hinted that you might move up in the company. Mostly, I'm just proud of you. You did the right thing by reporting what the audit found, and now you'll be rewarded for your work. Such was my Fred, always supporting me. He knew I needed a boost after a few tough weeks leading up to meeting Mr. Hansen, and used what Mr. Hansen told me about my career as an excuse to go out to dinner to help me relax after the ordeal. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Before I continue with my story, I would like to tell you a little about Fred and our relationship. Fred was 22 years old when I met him. It was the summer of 1994, and I was in Indianapolis visiting Connie Bradshaw, my college roommate. On my second day there, Connie informed me that she had made a date with me for that evening. I was a little upset because I don't like blind dates, but I decided that since I was only in town for a few days, it couldn't hurt to go on a date with this guy. After all, we'd be together with Connie and her boyfriend. Connie told me his name was Fred Alpin. She said he was a friend of her boyfriend's, but she didn't know him very well. She said he worked for some private investigation company. It sounded to me like it might be a PI. He's a PI? Sounds like a guy trying to pick up a girl by saying he's a CIA agent. I decided to withhold judgment until I met him. I asked Connie what he looked like. He's over 6 feet tall, maybe 180, 190 pounds. He has brown hair. His nose is a little crooked, Connie said. Is he handsome? I asked. Or does he have a great personality? Connie laughed. Don't worry, he's not a dog. What would you call him? I asked. Confident, Connie said. Confident? What do you mean by confident? I asked. You'll see when you meet him, she said. Connie's boyfriend picked us up at our house that night, and seeing no one else in the car, I decided I'd been set up. I got angry. John, where's Fred? Asked Connie to her boyfriend. He's going to meet us at the restaurant, said John. He got hung up on a case and said he had to finish some paperwork and would only be a few minutes late. Working on a case? John, is this friend of yours really a private detective? I asked. Not really a private detective. I'll let him explain that when he joins us, he replied. Connie, John, and I were just ordering drinks when Fred walked in. I had forgotten that Connie had described him as a confident man. All I knew was that when he introduced himself to me before Connie or John thought to do so, I immediately felt a warm connection between us. Later that evening, I told Connie that I thought he was handsome. Fred sat down next to me and immediately apologized for being late. Great first impression, he said. Late for our first date. I thought it was interesting that when he first met me, he called it a first date, implying that there would be a second date, but how could he have already known that? I'll accept your apology if you tell me what kind of private investigator you are, I said. It's a fair exchange, he said. Actually, we don't call ourselves private investigators. We call ourselves investigators. We're contracted by the big insurance companies. We investigate insurance claims for fraud, recover stolen property, or mitigate our clients' losses in any way we can. It's not as romantic as private investigator work. After all, what could be more romantic than sitting in a tree and photographing a man cheating on his wife? After that, Fred spent most of the rest of the evening asking me questions. He said he was very impressed when I told him I was working on getting my MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Fred laughed and said, I'm not smart enough to go out with you. As long as you realize that I'm letting you stay, I said. I like you, he said. Are there any good hotels near Penn State's campus where I could stay when I come to visit you? The question surprised me, but my answer surprised me even more. There are several hotels in the area. When are you planning to visit? I asked. I had a great time that night and ended up seeing Fred 4 more times during my week-long visit. I really fell in love with him, but decided not to pursue it with him. I wasn't sure I would see him again after I got back, so I didn't want to complicate things. I didn't want this to be a week-long affair. I got back to my apartment in Philadelphia on Sunday afternoon, and in the evening Fred called and asked if he could come visit me the following weekend. I was surprised that he called me so soon, and happily told him that I would love to see him next weekend. By the middle of the week, I decided that I would do it with him this weekend and not worry about it. I was falling in love with this one, so when he called me Thursday night and asked where to stay for the weekend, I told him I wanted him to stay with me at my apartment. We had a great time that weekend. Fred had never been to Philly before, so we did some touristy things. We went to Independence Hall, saw the Liberty Bell, visited the Franklin Institute, and went to a Phillies game. We also walked along the Schuylkill River and watched the 8-man cruise row down the river. It was a wonderful weekend, but the best event was the first time we made love. Fred arrived Friday night, and we didn't get to the restaurant for dinner until 8:30 p.m. There weren't many customers by then, and we were able to sit enjoying our food and each other for almost 2 hours before we started getting hints that it was time to leave. As we walked back to my apartment, I think we were both thinking about what would happen when we got there. When we got back to the apartment, I asked Fred to open a bottle of wine, and I turned on some music myself. For the next hour, we sat on the couch, sipping wine. Maybe we should go to bed, I said. I got up, took Fred's hand, and led him into my bedroom, and things got rolling. We got down to it. In the morning, we went sightseeing. I think after that weekend, we both realized we were meant to be together. Fred spent at least 1 weekend a month with me, and I traveled to Indianapolis every chance I got. Fred came to my graduation ceremony, sat with my parents, and proposed to me that night after dinner. His proposal was completely unexpected, but I was ready with an answer. Yes. I had known for months what my answer would be if he asked. My parents didn't have a lot of money, and Fred didn't want to wait a year while we planned the wedding, so we decided to get married that summer. We got married on a beach in Florida with only our immediate family and a few close friends in attendance. Fred already had a small house in Indianapolis where we lived until our new home was built. Fred continued to work at IIC, and I started looking for a job. I had no problem finding a job, but I was overqualified for it. I worked in retail for a year as a management trainee, but I didn't like the job and took a job as an assistant manager at a small branch of a large bank chain. This didn't last long because the bank chain was absorbed by a larger banking network, and I was made redundant. I spent the next 2 years working as a substitute teacher in the Indianapolis school district. This kept me reasonably busy, but it didn't pay very well. However, I enjoyed teaching. Finally, I heard about a management position opening at DC&H. Fortunately, I had taken some accounting courses in college. Because of that and my MBA, I landed a position as manager of the accounting department. I knew there were better jobs out there for a Wharton graduate, but I was happy to be the accounting manager at DC&H as long as I had Fred. And that's why the rest of my story is so hard to understand. I don't fully understand it myself. I'm hoping that putting it on paper will help me bring some clarity. Help me understand what I did to Fred and to myself. After the first meeting with Jack Hansen, things happened quickly. The following Monday, the new office manager arrived. His name was Greg Bartlett. Greg was a bald, chubby guy about 5.5 feet tall. He was friendly, but kept a business-like demeanor in his actions in the office. Mr. Bartlett was a good manager and knew how an office like ours should work, and he immediately began instituting changes, and the operation of the office seemed to respond to his changes. 2 weeks after Mr. Bartlett took over as office manager, Jack Hansen moved into the former sales manager's office while his permanent office was being built on the floor above our offices. That afternoon, Mr. Hansen stopped by my desk and asked me to come to his office at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to discuss some matters. His demeanor while talking to me had me at ease. He was smiling and looked very relaxed. So, at 3 o'clock, I entered his office and accepted his invitation to sit down. "You look very well today, Cathy," he said, "and certainly less tense than the last time we spoke." "Thank you. I feel better already." "I wanted to meet you to ask if you'd thought about our last conversation," he said. "About me being on your team?" I asked. "I've thought about it a lot. I'd like to think I could be helpful to you in your plans for this company, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't interested in the career opportunities you mentioned." "I'm glad to hear that, Cathy. I am eager to have you on my team, but I must say that I will demand your complete loyalty. I need to make sure that my team members keep up with me," he said. From the look on his face, I couldn't understand anything. "I have several assignments that I will ask you to complete to begin implementing my plans." "What kind of assignments?" I asked. "It's too early to talk about that. Before I outline my plans to you, I need to be absolutely certain that I can count on you. You'll have to prove yourself to me first," he said. I felt a signal go off in my head. I didn't like the direction the conversation was taking. Prove my worthiness to him? How? What is he expecting me to prove myself? "I'm not sure I understand, Mr. Hansen," I said. "How can I prove you right? What's your point?" Mr. Hansen got up from his desk and began to pace around the office. Then he sat down in the chair next to me. "Cathy, I find you a very attractive woman," he said. I thought, oh shit, this is about to start. "I don't want you to think I do things like this all the time," he continued. "The thing is, I've never done anything like this before. It's just that I need you to prove your absolute devotion to me, and I have an overwhelming desire to possess you. I hope I can convince you to help me fulfill both of my needs," he said. "Mr. Hansen, that's very inappropriate," I said. "I'm a married woman. Let's just pretend you've never offered anything." I'm sorry, Cathy, but I can't do that, he said. We're alone in this office, so you have no witnesses to what I said anyway. I'm not going to force you to do anything, but if you want to be part of my team, you now know my terms. Otherwise, you can continue to work here as an account manager, but you can forget about the great opportunities we talked about the other day. Part of my brain was screaming at me to just get up and walk out of his office, but I didn't. I can't cheat on my husband, I said. Think about it, he said. If your husband had been more favorable to your abilities, he would have moved with you to New York or Chicago, where you would have had a much better chance of getting the job you deserve, but he forced you to come to Indianapolis where your opportunities were very limited. In essence, he deprived you of the career you deserved. Now I'm offering you the opportunity to have the career you deserve by screwing me. I think there is justice for you in that. I couldn't believe what he was telling me. He was saying that Fred deserved for me to cheat on him and thus have the career I deserved, and Fred had somehow denied me that. Part of what he was saying made sense, but I still couldn't escape the thought that Mr. Hansen wanted me to pursue this with him, which meant that I would have to cheat on Fred. I couldn't find the words to respond to his suggestion. I know this has taken you by surprise, Cathy, so why don't you think about it for a while, and then we'll talk about it again next week, he said. As I got up to leave his office, Mr. Hansen said, Cathy, from now on I want you to call me Jack. As I left his office after lunch, I was in a daze. I sat at my desk and tried to make sense of everything Mr. Hansen had told me. Had I misinterpreted his words? Was he really suggesting that I do this with him? Yes, he was. There was no other way to interpret his words. I thought about going home and telling Fred about it, but decided against it because I knew Fred would want me to take Mr. Hansen to court, and I really didn't want to go through that mess. It was difficult, but I managed to get home that night and act like everything was okay. Fred never guessed that I was upset or what I was thinking. For the first couple of days, I was angry every time I thought of Mr. Hansen's offer, but as time went on, I started thinking about what he had said about Fred not being supportive enough of my career. In part, I knew it was wrong, but it was beginning to bother me a little. One afternoon, I found myself sitting at my desk, thinking about doing what Mr. Hansen wanted me to do. I didn't imagine doing it with him. I just thought about the fact that maybe I could do it. I could make sure Fred never found out about it, and then I could become part of Mr. Hansen's team, and great career opportunities would open up in front of me. After that, I started to hesitate with the idea. But I did decide on something. The next time I met with Mr. Hansen, I was going to bring a tape recorder and record our conversation. Whatever I decided to do, I wanted to have some backbone if I decided to take him to court. The following Monday afternoon, Mr. Hansen called me and said he wanted me to have lunch with him the next afternoon. In the evening, I asked Fred if I could borrow one of the mini dictaphones he had for work. I put it in my purse so I would have it at my lunch on Tuesday. Mr. Hansen and I left the office at 11:30 Tuesday morning to go to lunch. We ended up going to the social club he was a member of and had lunch in their dining room. I turned on my tape recorder as soon as we left the building, but Mr. Hansen didn't say a word about his proposal during the trip to the club or during lunch. After lunch, he gave me a little tour of the building. They had their own health club, and Mr. Hansen led me inside and then left me alone while he talked to the woman working behind the counter. A minute later, he returned with the woman. Katie, this is Sarah. She's going to help you, so just follow her. I had no idea what was going on, so I just followed Sarah into the women's locker room. She led me over to the closet and then asked me what size swimsuit I wore. I said, and she pulled a swimsuit out of the closet and held it out to me. You can use any of the clothes lockers, she said. I'll wait for you. I was very puzzled. Without realizing why, I moved from my seat. I changed into my swimsuit and approached Sarah again. She led me through the back of the locker room to the pool area. As soon as we walked in, I saw Mr. Hansen climbing into the hot tub. Sarah handed me a large towel and said, I'll be back for you in about half an hour. I walked over to the hot tub and just looked down at Mr. Hansen. Come on, Katie, get in. I won't bite, he said. I don't understand. What are we doing here? Asked I. I just wanted to talk, and what better place to talk than a hot tub, he said. Why can't we talk in the dining room? Asked I. Because it's better here. You can't take a tape recorder into the hot tub with you. I was stunned. How could he know I had a tape recorder with me? Don't sound so surprised. I'd be disappointed if you didn't have the sense to try to record our conversation, he said. In the future, I won't tolerate you trying to do something like that. I didn't say anything back, and he continued. I just want to chat for a while, and then Sarah will come back and get you. She's going to take you to the therapy room for a massage. This is my gift to you to help you relax. I decided I might as well listen to what he had to say, so I climbed into the hot tub and sat across from him. Mr. Hansen looked around to make sure we were alone and then began. I assume you've thought about what I said last week, he said. How could I not think about it? I said. I was very upset. But you couldn't decide against me, could you? He asked. I hadn't expected such a question, but he turned out to be right. No, I can't say that I did. Good. I'm glad to hear that. You can relax now. I don't plan on doing this with you tonight. That should be your decision. I won't force you to do anything. You have 2 months to make a decision. If you decide in my favor, just let me know when you want to solidify our new relationship. If you decide against me, you don't have to tell me. I'll know when the time is up. Today is March 5th. That means you have until Tuesday, May 7th. I was relieved that he had given me 2 months to make a decision, but how was I going to make it, and why was I even considering his offer? I guess I knew it was the idea of becoming a vice president someday and making a lot of money. I was driven by greed and ambition. I saw it as something I would have to do to get what I wanted. I knew it was like becoming a prostitute. Mr. Hansen spent the next few minutes talking about all the benefits of being a member of his team. He also talked about how Fred had put me in this position by forcing me to stay in Indianapolis. I didn't like him talking about Fred that way, but his words made sense. A few minutes later, Sarah came back for me, and as I climbed out of the hot tub, Mr. Hansen said, Remember, it's only 2 months. I'll remember, Mr. Hansen. Cathy, I told you to call me Jack. For the next hour, I received the best body massage I had ever had. I was so relaxed that I was able to think through the decision I was about to make without the emotions I usually felt when I thought about it. I realized that this must be why Mr. Hansen had arranged the massage for me. I had never wanted or even thought about having fun with anyone but Fred since the day I met him. But now I was contemplating having fun with Jack Hansen. Jack beckoned me with the possibility of great career success, and all I had to do was become a loyal member of his team, as he called it. To prove my loyalty, I had to take it up with him. Jack's suggestion seemed disgusting, so why didn't I just scrap the idea right away and tell Jack what I thought of him for suggesting it in the first place? Such thoughts swirled around in my head during the massage, and when it was over, I was still undecided. But I realized that I was closer to giving in to Mr. Hansen than I was to rejecting his offer. The following week, Mr. Hansen moved to his new office on the floor above our offices, so I didn't see him in the office anymore. I tried to put the offer out of my mind, but it kept coming back into my thoughts again and again. One night, when Fred was working late, I tried to imagine what it would be like to do it with Jack. I didn't like Jack for putting me in that position, but otherwise he seemed like a perfectly decent man. He was older than me by over 15 years, but he didn't look bad. In fact, he looked pretty solid. On Wednesday night, the first week of April, Fred came home and said he had to fly to Seattle the next day to get a deposition on a case he was working on. He was going to fly out Thursday morning and return Saturday afternoon. When he told me about the trip, I was disappointed that he wouldn't be with me for 2 days. But then a thought popped into my head. This might be just what I was looking for. An easy opportunity to do what Jack wanted. Fred would be out of town, and he'd never know what I'd done. Thursday afternoon, with my stomach tied in a knot, I picked up the phone and called Jack's office. His secretary picked up the phone and put me through to him immediately after I told him who I was. When he picked up the phone, I said, "Hi, Jack. It's Cathy." "Cathy, it's good to hear from you." "Jack, I'm ready. I can meet you tonight, wherever you want, I said. How about I take you out to dinner after work, and then we go back to my apartment? That would be fine, Jack. The rest of the day I was plagued with guilt. I hadn't done anything yet, but I'd already told Jack I'd do it with him. I was sure that every other person in the office would guess my plans just by looking at me. I wanted to call Jack and tell him I'd changed my mind, but I couldn't. I couldn't because I didn't want to cancel. My feelings about what I was doing were so confused that I couldn't think clearly about anything. The only thing I knew for sure was that I was only going to do this with Jack because of what he had promised me. I didn't even like him, and at the moment, I didn't really like myself either. I spent the day convincing myself that what I was doing would be good for both Fred and me. It was just the price I had to pay to get what I wanted. In the evening, Jack and I left the office separately and met at the restaurant Jack had chosen. I managed to have 2 scotches to take the edge off before dinner. During dinner, Jack talked about his ideas on how to get the Indianapolis, D.C. and H office positively recognized by the corporate offices in New York. He said we needed a big opportunity and we needed to make it happen, and he already had that opportunity in his pocket. He didn't say anything else to me. He said that once he was sure he could trust me, he would tell me all his plans and that I would be an important part of them. While I listened to him, I ate my dinner and drank half a bottle of Merlot. By the time we left for Jack's apartment, I was feeling no more pain. Jack offered me a ride, but I insisted on driving my car. I didn't want to be locked in his apartment. I wanted to be able to go home later. I knew I shouldn't drive in the state I was in, but I did it anyway, and thankfully made it to Jack's apartment without incident. Ned, Jack asked if I wanted a drink when we entered his apartment, but I declined. I was already out of control, and I didn't need alcohol in my system at all. Jack turned on some music and then took me in his arms and started dancing with me. He pulled me to him and I rested my head on his shoulder, but not because I was comfortable in his arms, but because I was unstable due to the alcohol and needed his support to keep from falling on my ass. And as it happened, we got down to it. Afterward, as we lay on the bed, Jack suggested I stay the night. Katie, you've had a lot to drink tonight. I think it would be a good idea for you to spend the night here, he said. I guess you're right, I said, and immediately fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I immediately said, Jack, I'm going home to shower and get ready for work. Okay, I'll see you at the office, Cathy. As I drove home, I tried to figure out how I felt. I wondered if the hangover had clouded my thoughts. I knew I should feel guilty, but I didn't. I wasn't happy about what I had done, but I didn't feel depressed or the need to confess to Fred. I felt no excitement about the affair that had just begun. I guessed that I had resigned myself to the fact that I would be prostituting myself to get ahead. I wanted what Jack was offering me, and I was willing to pay the price. I felt that Jack had as much to lose as I did if anyone found out about our affair, so I was sure he would be as careful as I was. When I got home, there was a message on the recorder from Fred. He had called at 11 o'clock. He apologized for calling so late and said he would talk to me in the morning. I myself was surprised at how calm I was about missing Fred's call. I was sure he would call me before I left for work, so I didn't have to think about how to take the call. No complicated explanations as to why I missed the call. I was asleep. Don't say or do anything out of the ordinary. No need to tell him how much I missed him because it might make him suspicious. I was still going through all these thoughts in my head when the phone rang. I knew it was Fred, so I picked up the phone and said, "Good morning, honey." "Good morning, Cathy. How is my beautiful wife doing this morning?" "I'm fine. Just listened to your message yesterday. Why did you call so late?" "I forgot about the time difference. Why didn't you answer?" he asked. "I was asleep," I said. "I had a busy day and didn't get home until after 7 o'clock. I went to bed at 10 and watched TV waiting for your call. By 10:30, I couldn't sleep a wink, so I turned off the TV and fell asleep. Surprisingly, I didn't wake up when you called. The phone was right next to my head. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner, but I didn't get back to the hotel until after 8 o'clock. Well, be sure to call by 10 o'clock tonight," I said. and Fred promised he would. The rest of the conversation was routine. After the call, I headed for the shower, and although the hot water helped clear my head, I was starting to feel guilty. The problem was that I wasn't feeling guilty because I was having fun with Jack. I felt guilty because I liked that Fred accepted my excuse for not answering the phone and finally apologized to me for calling so late. That was the beginning of it. After that night, I met Jack at his apartment about once every 2 weeks. Mostly during the day, but sometimes, if Fred was out of town, we'd meet at night. Over time, I began to like Jack. In the weeks that followed, Jack began laying out his plan to gain control of the company and what role I would play in his plans. He told me that we had 2 tasks to accomplish. The first was to make the Indianapolis office look good. Thanks to Greg Bartlett's efforts, the office already looked better. Mr. Bartlett knew how to cut costs and streamline operations, and we were already seeing the results of that. The next step was to increase sales, and Jack pulled up the sales staff, who began winning new clients and bringing in more clients from existing clients. The last step was to find a major opportunity that would get the attention of the board of directors. Jack was already working on this. When Jack was still in New York, Mike Rogan, one of his salespeople, came to him with an offer he was working on at National Pharmaceutical. Apparently, Mike Rogan was a friend of Harold Benson, National's CEO, and Mr. Benson had discussed with him his desire to increase the size of his company by acquiring another company and asked Mike to see if the company he was interested in was inclined to make a deal. Jack told Mike that he would help him do so, and later told Mike that the company Mr. Benson was interested in would not be a good investment. Shortly thereafter, Jack arranged for Mike Rogan to take a 2-year job at a DC&H subsidiary in Paris. Mike gladly accepted, but 2 months after he arrived in Paris, DC&H sold the subsidiary, leaving Mike Rogan to fend for himself. Shortly thereafter, Jack moved to Indianapolis and then contacted Mr. Benson at National Pharmaceutical. He said that Mike had asked him to assist National in their quest to acquire another pharmaceutical company, and thus began negotiations between National, DC&H, and Keystone Pharmaceutical. The second thing Jack said we needed to do was to find a way to get rid of Mr. Ward, the current CEO of DC&H, and Mr. Salter, the president of the company. Jack had a plan for that, and I was part of that plan. Jack told me that he knew that Mr. Ward and Mr. Salter were involved in illegal transactions, including insider trading. They were using third parties to buy stock in companies that they knew were going to merge or be taken over. This was highly illegal, and if the SEC found out, they could go to jail. Jack's plan was simple. He wanted to make the SEC find out about Mr. Ward and Mr. Salter's activities. Jack told me that I was to become an informant. I was to contact the SEC and give them information that would trigger an investigation. I was very uncomfortable with what Jack wanted me to do. My actions could lead to these people going to jail, and I didn't want that on my conscience. I told Jack how I felt. "Cathy," Jack said, "you have to realize that what these men did is illegal, and they shouldn't get away with it. They have done this sort of thing many times before and have become very rich because of it. Their activities have ruined many small investors." I understood that their actions were justified, but I still felt uneasy that I would be the one to take them down. Then Jack turned to my practical side. "When I take power, I plan to keep you very close to me. That means you could be vice president next year with a 6-figure salary and very large bonuses," he said. "So don't be soft. Don't give up on the race when the finish line is in sight." The next day, I called the SEC and talked to an investigator. I told him that I had come across information about insider trading related to certain individuals at DC&H and that I didn't know what to do about it. The investigator became very interested and started asking a lot of questions. Jack gave me all the information he wanted me to leak to the SEC, and I let the investigator slowly draw it out of me. At the end of the conversation, the investigator told me that they would be contacting me again soon. Over the next 4 weeks, I spoke with 3 different investigators several times. I played the role of concerned employee so well that I began to believe I was really doing it for the good of the company. During this time, my life with Fred was going well. Fred had no idea that I had a relationship with Jack or that I was involved in Jack's plans to take over the company. In August, I received a call from John Hargrove, the SEC's lead investigator on the DC and H case, informing me that they had indeed found evidence that the allegations I had made were true and were going to investigate further, which meant that the FBI might get involved. The day I received this news was the day before Fred and I were going to move into our new home. I immediately called Jack's office and told him I needed to talk to him. He told me to come over in 10 minutes. When I told Jack about the call from John Hargrove, he said we needed to celebrate and suggested we go out for a drink. As we left the building and headed to Jack's car, he kept telling me what a great job I had done selling the SEC the information I was providing them. He told me he was proud of me, and by the time we got to the car, I was so filled with self-esteem that I didn't even notice that Jack was taking me to his apartment and not to a bar for a celebratory drink. I wasn't happy when I realized what was going on, but I knew I had to accept it, so I smiled at Jack and followed him into the apartment. Next, Jack pulled a bottle of champagne out of the fridge and poured us each a glass, then raised a toast to me. "To the future Vice President of DC and H," Jack said, and held out his glass to me. I felt my face redden when he said that. We touched each other's glasses, and then we both took a sip of champagne. Jack set his glass aside, then took the glass from me and set it back down. He gave me a hug right away. After a while, we got down to it. I wondered how long it would last. It began to dawn on me that Jack might be planning to use me as his plaything, even after he got control of the company. I thought how stupid I'd have to be to think this would be a very short-term affair. That night when I got home, for the first time, I had trouble looking Fred in the eye when he talked to me. I had a hard time hiding the fact that I felt guilty about my behavior. Fortunately, Fred was too busy preparing for our move the next day to notice my strange behavior. The next day, after the movers unloaded the truck and we were unpacking boxes, I thought about what I had done to Jack the day before. I felt guilty about it. It took us a few days to unpack everything and set up the house, but once we did, I fell in love with him. One night shortly after, while making love, Fred reminded me that I had said I was thinking we could start working on making a baby in the fall. "I think it's time for you to get off birth control pills and we'll get pregnant," he said. "I think we should wait a little longer," I said. Jack suggested I wait until next year. He said I'm in line for a promotion and it could happen by the end of the year. I want to wait until I'm promoted. Jack? Why did I say that? I knew Fred didn't like Jack. Fred thought Jack had a wandering eye and didn't trust him. "Yes, Jack Hansen." "Since when did you start calling vice presidents of corporations by their first names?" asked Fred. "We're pretty informal in the office," she replied. "Why would you discuss our plans to start a family with him?" Jack asked me if we were planning to have children, and I told him that we were planning to have them this fall. Then he suggested I wait until next year. I could see that this upset Fred. I could see that he didn't like the influence Jack was having on me, so I was relieved when Fred agreed to wait until January. For the next few months, Fred and I were very busy with work. We both worked a lot and didn't spend as much time together as we would have liked. On the other hand, Jack and I did spend a lot of time together. From August through September, Jack and I had 7 special meetings. Also during this time, the merger deal between National Pharmaceutical and Keystone Pharmaceutical began to heat up. Mr. Benson, the CEO of National, came to the office to meet with Jack, and I ran into them in the hallway. Jack introduced me to him. Mr. Benson was about 35 years old and 6 feet tall. He weighed about 175 pounds and was quite good looking. Jack told me later that Mr. Benson was impressed with me and wanted to meet me. I couldn't imagine what he wanted to meet with me about, but I offered my candidacy. That same day, Mr. Benson came to my office and said that as an accountant, he wanted my opinion of Keystone Pharmaceutical. I reviewed Keystone's financials, after which Mr. Benson asked me a few more questions, but most of them were about how we were doing business. I guessed that he just wanted to get a better understanding of what we were about, so that he would feel more comfortable working with us. I later told Jack about the meeting with Mr. Benson, and he said, Mr. Benson wasn't interested in your opinion of Keystone or what you have to say about DC and H. He just wanted to talk to you. Mr. Benson is anxious to talk to you. Can't you see that? I was embarrassed by what Jack had said, but at the same time felt a little boost to my ego. One evening, near the end of November, Fred and I went out to dinner after shopping all day. I knew that Fred was going to start talking about starting a family again. I told him that we could start in January, but thought that maybe I should wait a little longer. I decided to take the initiative and take the discussion into my own hands. I told him I had some good news. It looks like we'll have a deal with National Pharmaceutical to merge with Keystone Pharmaceutical by December 20th, I said. That means I'll get a promotion this year. Really? That's terrific, Fred said. Then we can start working on getting you pregnant. Why don't we start tonight? I can't start tonight. I'm still on the pill, I said. Besides, I want to wait a few more months to settle into my new job before I go on maternity leave, and don't you dare tell anyone I told you this. I could get in a lot of trouble if it got out, and it would probably ruin the deal with National. You know I won't tell anyone, he said. Should I run out and buy National Pharmaceutical stock on Monday? Hell no, I said. That's insider trading. If you do that, we could all go to jail. Fred said he was just kidding, and that he knew we couldn't do anything like that. On Friday, December 6th, we went to the IYC Christmas party. We sat with Bill and Susan Ripley. Bill is Fred's best friend, and Susan has become a close friend of mine. It was a small party with dinner and dancing, but we had a good time. After all I had been through the last few months, this party really relaxed me. But then, the drinking and dancing turned me on, and I couldn't wait for Fred to get home. When we got home, we went straight to the bedroom and got down to it. That Saturday morning, my world began to fall apart. Up until that point, I thought I had everything under control. Fred left for work that morning, and Jack showed up at the house to talk to me. Cathy, we need to talk, was how he started the conversation. I need to discuss two things with you. First, we have a problem with the merger deal. Benson said he was thinking of offering the deal to other M&A companies. I realized he was bluffing and figured he was waiting for some kind of kickback for himself. When I questioned him, trying to figure out what I could do to get him to sign with us, he said he wanted you. What the hell are you talking about? I asked. Benson wants to have some fun with you. If you do that, he'll sign the contract. It's as simple as that, said Jack. I can't do that. I'm already cheating on my husband with you. I just can't do that to Fred, I said. Katie, this is the deal we need if we want to take over this company. We can't lose this contract. You have to do it. There's just no other way, Jack said. I thought about it for a minute and realized that I could do it. I mean, if I could do it with Jack and pretend to enjoy it, I could certainly do it once with Mr. Benson and make him think I enjoyed it too. Jack, can I have a little time to think about this? I asked. I didn't want to agree too quickly. I didn't want to look like too much of a slut, even in front of Jack. Sure, we'll talk on Tuesday, but you know I expect you to agree. I know, I said. When is this supposed to happen? We want to sign the contract on the 20th, so we thought we could set it up during our Christmas party. We've invited Mr. Benson to the party, so you can take care of him, and then we'll sign the contract, Jack said. Take care of him? Jack said it so coldly. The way he said it made me feel cheap. What else did you want to talk about? I asked. First, I know that even though you like our special meetings, you'd like to be able to stop sneaking around behind Fred's back, so I have a suggestion for you, Jack said. I just stared at him and waited for him to continue. I know you two are planning on starting a family soon, Jack said. I told Fred I wanted to wait a few more months. I think you should start sooner, Jack said. What do you mean? Asked I. When you become fertile again? I mean, when in the current or next cycle are you most fertile? He asked. I don't know. I need to find out. Okay, do that and let me know on Tuesday when we meet, he said. Why? Because I want to get you pregnant first, he said. What? I can't do that. Fred would not only leave me, he might kill me. I couldn't believe Jack could expect me to let him get pregnant. Fred will never know. If I got you pregnant, the baby would have dark hair and brown eyes. Fred wouldn't see enough resemblance to me to arouse suspicion. No, I can't do that. You expect Fred to raise your child as his own? I can't do that to him, I said. Katie, that would be the ultimate test of loyalty. If you do this for me, will you never have to prove your loyalty again? And if I say yes, and you don't get me pregnant, what then? I asked. You'll honestly give me a shot at the most fertile moment of your cycle, and I won't have to ask you again. You won't have to prove your loyalty to me anymore. I don't. I'm asking for a lot of things. If Fred finds out, my marriage will be over. If Fred finds out I've been entertaining you for the past 7 months, your marriage will be over, so why take another risk? He asked. I had 2 big problems when Jack left, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that entertaining Mr. Benson was okay. I could do it to get what I wanted. The bigger problem was giving Jack what he wanted. When Fred came home after dinner, I was so engrossed in my thoughts that I didn't even hear Fred enter the house. When I finally heard his voice, it startled me. For a second, I thought Fred could read my mind and know what I was thinking about doing. I tried not to look Fred in the eye because I was afraid he would see my guilt. I managed not to talk about what was bothering me until just before dinner. Then Fred asked me why I looked so depressed. Cathy, what's going on? Something is obviously bothering you, he said. Is there anything I can do to help? There's a problem with the deal with National Pharmaceutical, I said. It turns out that the president of National Pharmaceutical, Mr. Benson, is making unrealistic demands, and if we don't give him what he wants, it could cost us the deal. If we don't get this contract, it'll ruin everything. It won't ruin everything. No matter what happens, we have each other. Don't worry so much. What's the worst that could happen? He asked. You don't understand, I said. If the deal falls through, it'll be because of me. If that happens, I could lose my job. How can it be your fault if the deal falls through? I asked. It's not like you're in sales. I realized I shouldn't have said it would be my fault. I had to think fast to stop this conversation before I gave away too much. I can't tell you anything else. I can't talk to anyone outside of DC and H about this. The only thing I can say is that I haven't done anything wrong. I don't understand, he said. If you didn't do anything wrong, how can it be your fault? I told you I can't talk about this with you, I said. I could lose my job if I told you as much as I've already told you. You're going to have to let me handle it myself. For the rest of the weekend, I managed not to discuss the problem with Fred again. On Sunday, I made a decision about what I was going to do. I was going to salvage the deal with National by agreeing to have fun with Benson. Then, I decided to put the biggest lie of my life on the line. I tossed the birth control pills in the bathroom wastebasket, marked the beginning of December 6th on my calendar, then counted down 14 days to December 20th, put an asterisk, and underlined it. Monday morning, I got up early and left for work at 6:30 a.m. Fred asked me why I was leaving so early, and I replied that I needed to get ready for some important meetings. After getting to my office, I closed the door and sat at my desk thinking about what I should do. Having made a decision, I felt a little better, but I was still frustrated. I didn't get much work done on Monday, but I went over my plans in my head a few times, so I wouldn't make a mistake later. When I got home in the evening, I could see the concern on Fred's face. I hated what I was doing to him, but there was nothing I could do to rectify the situation anytime soon. Has it gotten better at work? Asked Fred. You know I can't talk to you about that, I said. I'm under a lot of pressure, but I'll get through it. I met with Jack on Tuesday and told him my answers. I told him I would take it up with Mr. Benson if it would save the contract, and then told Jack I would give him what he was asking for. Do you know when you will be most prolific? He asked. December 20th, I said. Wow, December 20th. You're going to be busy that day, aren't you? I guess so. Are you sure you'll be fertile on that day? He asked. I pulled out my calendar with the month on it and showed him. I pointed to December 6th and said, "That's the day I got my last period, and my most fertile day will be 14 days after that, which is the 20th. Jack thought for a moment and then said, "I'll have to think about it to decide if that's acceptable. I may want to wait until the start of your next period and calculate your fertile day based on that." I agreed, but I wasn't happy. If he decided to wait, it would ruin my whole plan. On Sunday, I stopped taking the pill and decided I couldn't get pregnant for at least another month. I also lied about the date my period started. My last period started on November 30th, so I would have been in my fertile days by then. I didn't want to risk Jack actually getting me pregnant. I was hoping that Fred would get me pregnant in January, and I would tell him that I hadn't told him about not being on the pill because I wanted to surprise him. I was afraid that if I told him I wasn't on the pill, he would start telling people and Jack would find out. If I got pregnant in January, I hoped I could make Jack think he was the father. I knew it was a stupid plan, but I couldn't risk Jack getting me pregnant. I hardly spoke to Fred that night as I was too nervous about what Jack would decide. To my great relief, Jack agreed to do it on the 20th. He said, "I think it will work out." When Fred got home that night, he noticed that my mood had immediately improved. "Can you talk about what's going on now, or are those conversations still off limits to me?" he asked. "I shouldn't be talking to you about this, but it looks like we found a way to make Mr. Benson happy," I said. Jack said it looks like things should work out after all. Although I felt better than I had a couple days before, I didn't feel comfortable enough to give myself to Fred that night or the next few nights. The following Monday, Fred told me that he would have to work late every night this week to finish the last 2 cases he was working on. "You can't work late on Friday," I said. "You have to be home in time to get ready for the party." "What time do we have to be there?" he asked. "The party starts at 8 o'clock. I want to be there no later than 8:30, I replied. "So you need to be home by 7 o'clock to get ready." "Okay, I'll be home by 7. Thursday night at dinner, Jack told me he was going to have a hard time getting home by 7. "You promised," I said. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry, but I'm so close to it, I just have to close it tomorrow. Katie, you don't have to wait for me. If I'm not there on time, drive without me. I'll get there as soon as I can. I have to be there by 9 o'clock. "I don't want to go without you," I said. "I think 9 o'clock will be just fine. I just can't be later than that time." A cold chill suddenly swept over me. I don't know why it was suddenly so important, but I didn't want to go to the party alone. It was funny, because I knew things would be a lot easier if Fred wasn't there at all, but I wanted him with me. I guess some part of me hoped that Fred's presence would somehow give me the strength to do what I had to do that night. Admittedly, my thoughts were confused. I also knew that if I acted like I didn't want him to come to the party, he would start to suspect something, and the last person I wanted to arouse suspicion was Fred. "I'll do my best to get home by 7:30. If I don't make it, I'll meet you at the party." I was upset, but said nothing more. Friday morning, I got a call from Jack's secretary saying that Jack wanted me to call him at 10 a.m. Before 10, I sat at my desk and tried to look busy. I was worried about what Jack was going to tell me. Had there been a problem? Could I hope that Mr. Benson had changed his mind and decided he would sign the contract, abandoning his plan to do this with me? At 10 o'clock, I called. "Good morning, Jack, it's me." "Good morning, Cathy, how are you today?" "Nervous," I replied. "That's not necessary," Jack said. "What time is Fred due back from work tonight?" asked Jack. "He said he's going to try to get home at 7:30. "Good. Then why don't you go home early, maybe around 2 o'clock, and treat yourself while getting ready for the party tonight?" I was a little surprised that Jack hadn't said anything about doing it with me. "Sounds like a good idea," I said. "I'll go home at 2 o'clock and try to relax. Maybe a hot bath will help relieve some of the tension I've been feeling." "Good girl," Jack said condescendingly. "I'll check in with you later to see how you're doing." That was the end of the conversation. I was feeling a little sick. At noon, I went to lunch and decided not to come back. I drove home slowly, contemplating the lies I would have to tell Fred that night. I would tell him that I had to go to a short business meeting with Mr. Bartlett, Jack, and Mr. Benson to sign a contract. And when we get home, I'll tell Fred that I don't feel well, so I won't do it with him. At 4 o'clock, I lay in the tub, trying to relax and not think about what I was going to do this evening. The hot water had the desired effect on me, and I was about to fall asleep when I heard the doorbell ring. I was about to ignore it, but whoever was at the door kept ringing. I grabbed my robe and went downstairs to see who was at the door, with the intention of chasing them away. When I peeked through the window next to the door, I saw Jack standing there. I opened the door ajar so I could talk to him. "Jack, what are you doing here? Aren't you going to let me in?" I wanted to tell him to leave, but there was no way I could make the words come off my lips. "Did you forget that we were going to make a baby today?" asked Jack. I felt defeated when he said that. I backed away from the door and let him come in. Jack took off his coat, hung it on the railing at the foot of the stairs, and followed me into the kitchen. I don't know why I went into the kitchen, but when we got there, I offered Jack a drink. "I'll have a beer," he said. "This is a beautiful house." "Thanks. We love it," I said. Jack and I sat at the kitchen table drinking beer and talking about the party and our plans for the future of the company. And finally, Jack returned to the subject of our special meetings. "Since this will be the last of our special meetings, I thought it would be nice to have it in your bedroom," he said. I felt a sudden resentment building up inside me. "Look, Jack, I'm not doing this with you in my bedroom. Being unfaithful to Fred is one thing, but cheating on him in our bed is something I won't do." Jack only smiled at me. "Okay, Cathy. I guess I got a little carried away." I was angry, but I tried not to show it. I just wanted to get it over with, so as soon as we finished our beers, I took Jack's hand and led him to our guest room. There, we spent about an hour there. Then I got up and told Jack that I needed to change the linens and make the bed, so he would have to get up and get dressed. "It's getting late, Jack. I think it's time for you to leave," I said. Jack looked at his watch and said, "It's only 25 minutes after 5. You said Fred wouldn't get home until 7:30, so we still have plenty of time. Now hurry up and meet me on the stairs." As Jack walked down the stairs, panic gripped me. As I started down the stairs, I saw Jack sitting in an upholstered chair just inside the living room. At the foot of the stairs, I turned right and stopped next to the chair Jack was sitting in. I didn't look at him because I was looking at our grandfather clock, which had started to chime half an hour. Apparently, the clock was letting me know the time, and it was making me tense up. And then I heard a sound that sent cold goosebumps running through my body. It was the sound of the garage door opening. Fred was home. I jumped up, told Jack to leave, grabbed a towel, and ran up the stairs. "Katie, I'm home!" I heard Fred yell as he came up the stairs. When I didn't answer, he called out to me again. "You're home early," I replied. "Great. I'm in the bathroom getting ready. Why don't you use the shower in the guest bathroom?" "Why?" "I'm busy here," I said. The door to the bathroom swung open. "What did you say?" he asked. In a panic, I screamed, "I said I'm busy here. Get out." "What are you doing?" asked Fred. "It was supposed to be a surprise," I said. "For who?" asked Fred. "For you, of course. I wanted to surprise you when we got home from the party," I said. "Did I ever tell you I wanted you to shave?" he asked. "No, but I thought that—" Fred didn't let me finish. "Where did you even get that idea?" "Certainly not from me," he said. I could see Fred was starting to get angry, and I couldn't think of anything to say to calm him down. Now I was getting angry, but I didn't know who. Fred was silent for a minute, and I was beginning to think I had won the argument. I didn't talk to Fred the whole time we were packing for the road. Fred thought I was mad at him, but I wasn't. I was mad at myself for getting involved in this story in the first place. Why couldn't I be content with the life I had before Jack came to town? Fred watched me get dressed. I thought that was a good sign. He always liked to watch me dress for going out, so it made me feel good that he was watching me. As we were getting ready to leave the house, Fred said, "You look really good. You're going to melt anyone's heart tonight." I replied, "I hope yours does." On the way to the party, I decided to try to improve our relationship. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's just that I thought it was a good idea at the time, and I'm so nervous about tonight that I probably just snapped when you snapped at me about it." "No problem," Fred said. "We can talk about it this weekend, but let's just try to have fun tonight." The party was held in a large auditorium on the second floor of our office building. Almost as soon as we arrived, Jack came up to us and greeted us, then took me aside. "Katie, is everything okay?" "Yes. It was close, but Fred didn't know you were there," I said. "So everything's on for tonight?" he asked. "Yes." Fred asked what Jack needed, and I said, "The deal with National Pharmaceutical closes tonight. At 10 o'clock, I have to go to a meeting with Jack and Mr. Bartlett. If the meeting goes well, we'll sign the contract with National tonight." "So you'll get your promotion?" There was something odd about the way Fred asked the question. I wasn't sure, but it sounded sarcastic. "Yeah, if it works out." "Then we can start trying for a baby?" asked Fred. "Yes, we can start our family," I said, trying to end this conversation. I sensed that Fred suspected something, but he didn't make it clear what it was, if he knew anything at all. I hoped that he knew what was going on and was going to put a stop to it. I figured that since he was still with me, he would eventually forgive me and believe me if I told him that I had been forced into everything I was doing. I needed Fred by my side, so I slipped my arm through his and leaned against him as we entered the room. We had been in the room for less than a minute when Fred pointed to a guy standing at the bar and asked, "Who is that guy standing at the bar?" "I don't know," I said, but I knew who it was. It was Mr. Benson. I hoped Fred hadn't noticed my reaction to his question. "Why don't we go over to the bar and have a drink?" suggested Fred. I was afraid that if I went to the bar, Mr. Benson would say something that would let Fred know I had just lied to him, so I said, "There are some members of my department here I'd like to say hello to. Why don't you pour us both a drink, and I'll wait here for you." I sat down with my team, but watched Fred as he approached the bar. He ordered drinks and then started talking to Mr. Benson. This disturbed me. I wondered if Mr. Benson would mention that he knew me, and I worried about what they might be talking about. Fred brought me my drink and said he was going to split up. I didn't want him to leave me, but I couldn't stop him because I couldn't explain why I wanted him to stay with me. When Fred left the table, I was so depressed that I considered just leaving and facing the consequences of all my actions later, but apparently I was too much of a coward to leave. As I was looking for Fred, I noticed that he was talking to Mr. Benson again. Now I was getting scared. A few minutes later, the orchestra played, and Bert Carpenter asked me to dance. I declined and said I was waiting for my husband. A minute later, Fred came back to the table, and before he could sit down, I dragged him to the dance floor. The most comfortable I had felt all evening was being in Fred's arms on the dance floor. When the dance was over and we were back at the table, Greg Bartlett came up to me with a small bag in his hands. He pulled me aside and whispered, "I think you know what you should do with this." I felt a queasy feeling in my stomach as I went back to the table to talk to Fred. "I have to go to the girls' room," I said. Fred gave me a hard look and said, "Don't do that." "Don't do what?" I asked, trying to guess what he was thinking. "No." He grabbed my hand and held it up and looked me in the eye. "You know what I'm talking about. You know I'm not stupid. I know what's going on here. Stop it now." I felt my knees start to shake, and I thought I was about to pass out. How could he know? Until I knew how much Fred knew, I had to act like I wasn't doing anything wrong and had no idea what he was talking about. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "I just need to go to the girls' room." I pulled away from Fred and walked away as tears began to run down my cheeks. I sat in a stall in the girls' restroom, trying to get my heart to slow down, and contemplated how much Fred knew. After all, he is an investigator, and a very good investigator. If he became aware of something that made him suspicious, he would dig until he got to the truth. With that in mind, I realized that my marriage was in deep danger no matter what I decided to do. In the end, the only thing I could see was to keep going with the plan. At least I would have a career to fall back on if the marriage could not be saved. Today, as I was walking back to the party from the ladies' room, I heard a familiar voice coming from the speakers set up by the band. "May I have your attention, please?" As I entered the hall, I heard the same announcement. "May I have your attention, please?" Reaching the door, I looked for Fred at the table, but he wasn't there. That's when I realized whose voice I'd heard over the speakers. It took me a moment to see where he was standing, holding the microphone. "Can I get everyone's attention?" said Fred. The room went quiet, and I stood frozen in place, waiting to see what Fred would say. "Thank you. I want to take a few minutes to talk to all of you about this special occasion. First, I want to say what a wonderful party this is. Let's give a round of applause to those who threw this party for us." The guests started applauding, and I walked over to Fred. "I've had a few drinks and I'm feeling pretty good right now, so I hope the words come out right. The reason I want to talk to you is because I want to share some things that are going on with me and my wonderful wife, Cathy." Fred looked at me and smiled, but his smile was not genuine. Then he turned away from me and looked across the room at Jack, Mr. Bartlett, and Mr. Benson. Fred definitely knew something, but what it was, I had no idea. Part of me hoped that he would say something to end this whole nightmare, and part of me hoped that Fred had just gotten drunk and decided that he needed to thank the company for throwing this party. Unfortunately, I knew Fred wasn't that drunk. He was never that drunk. "First, I want to share some good news with all of you. Katie and I are having a baby," he said. Why had he said that? It wasn't true, at least not yet. Did he really know about Jack wanting me to have his baby and was trying to make Jack angry? Many of the guests started applauding, and a few of my friends shouted well wishes for me. I covered my face with my hands to hide my humiliation. There's more good news. Cathy told me that she's getting a promotion tonight because of her work on the National Pharmaceutical Company deal. I understand that Cathy, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Hansen, and Mr. Benson will be meeting upstairs tonight to sign the contract. Isn't that great? Oh, shit. So much for that. That statement could very well cost me my job. "Oh God, please stop!" I shouted. I was now very close to Fred, but my legs were too weak to carry me any further. I sank to the floor and just lay there. This evening started out so strangely that I thought I'd share it with you. When I returned home from work in the evening, I found my favorite wife in the bathroom getting ready to shave. Oh my God, he was going to tell me everything. I wished I could disappear. We had a little argument about it. She said it was supposed to be a surprise for me, and I told her not to do it. I won that argument, or at least I thought I did. I realize now that she wasn't doing it for me, but on Jack's orders, said Fred. There was complete silence in the room. I could almost hear my heart pounding in my chest. She was supposed to be a gift to Mr. Benson tonight. Your company's management seems to think it's good business to encourage your employees to do this with potential clients to get contracts, even if it ruins the marriage, Fred said. Fred seemed to know more than I realized he might know about all of this. Fred went on for another minute, but I wasn't listening to him anymore. I curled up in a ball on the floor and tried to figure out if there was a way to just dissolve into the floor and disappear. Suddenly, I noticed that there was silence in the room. "Katie?" I heard someone's voice. I looked up to see Fred leaning over to speak to me. "Fred, I'm so..." I tried to apologize. Fred interrupted me. "Katie, don't say anything," he then said. "Do you think you'll get that promotion now?" I put my head on my hand again and cried. I had just lost everything. I don't know how long I lay on the floor until Carol Studwell came over to see if I was okay. Carol works in my accounting department. I couldn't answer her questions, so she helped me to my feet and led me out by my coat. "You can stay with me until you decide what you want to do," Carol said. I was in a daze, so I just did whatever Carol told me to do. When we got to her apartment, Carol poured me a strong drink and gave me a cold washcloth to wipe my face. In the state I was in, I shouldn't have been drinking anything, but I drank a lot that night, and while I was drinking I told Carol everything. I guess I felt I had to clear my conscience, and Carol was the only person I thought would listen to me. I knew I couldn't tell Fred the whole story, even if he ever spoke to me again. I was also sure I would never speak to Jack again. Carol was a good listener. She didn't ask a lot of questions and listened as if every word I said was very important. She also made sure my glass stayed full of scotch. I talked, drank, got drunk, passed out, and in the morning I felt very sick. Saturday morning, Carol needed to get out of the house and run some errands, so I stayed in bed and thought about what I would say to Fred if he ever gave me a chance to talk to him. I couldn't tell him the truth. It would make me look too bad. I had to find a way to make it look like it was someone else's fault. By the time I got up to take a shower, I thought I had the whole story figured out and was ready to confront Fred if he would let me. It was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon when I worked up the courage to call home. The answering machine picked up on the 5th ring, and I left a message for Fred to call me and gave Carol's phone number. I just hoped Fred would call. Later in the afternoon, while Carol and I were talking, the phone rang and Carol picked up. "Who do I think is calling?" said Carol. Carol handed me the receiver and said, "It's Fred." "Where have you been?" asked me. "I've been calling all day." "Not all day," he said. "I was home until 1 o'clock in the afternoon." "Oh, I guess that's when I started calling you." Fred was silent for a while, and I said, "Fred, can I come home?" "You live here, don't you?" he said. "You should be here now." That sounded promising. He wants me to come home. Maybe all is not yet lost. "I'll be home in an hour," I said. I got home a little after 6 o'clock, and Fred had already made dinner. I took that as a very good sign. He made spaghetti and meatballs and a salad. He also opened a bottle of Chianti. Looking at Fred pouring the wine, I felt my spirits lift. Fred asked where I was staying for the night. "Did one of my friends take me home after you left?" "Oh, you didn't stay until the end of the party," he said sarcastically. "You practically ended the party with your speech," I said. "I guess I owe some people an apology for that. Not to you, and certainly not to Bartlett or Hansen." "I think you're right. I owe you an apology," I said. And I was ready to tell my story that I had made up at Carol's house that morning, but Fred stopped me. He said we would talk about it after dinner. After dinner, I started to put the dishes in the dishwasher, but Fred stopped me. "You can clean up the kitchen later, but right now we need to talk," he said. We went and sat down in the family room. "Do you want to just tell me everything, or should I start asking questions?" "Either way, I only expect the truth," he said. "I'll tell you everything," I said. "I'm sure you know when it started. It was the day after your Christmas party. Jack called me and told me that the huge deal they were working on with National Pharmaceutical was in trouble. Jack told me that Mr. Benson had told them that he would only sign the contract if I agreed to take it up with him. I couldn't believe he could ask me for something like that and got angry, but he told me that this deal was very important to the company, and if I agreed and did what they were asking, I would get a big reward. He talked about a lot of money and a promotion. I didn't want to do it, but Jack kept pushing me and told me that a lot of people were depending on me. I told them I needed to think about it. They made me so confused and worried about it that I couldn't think straight. When you came home and I looked at you, I realized I couldn't do that to you." On Monday, Jack and Mr. Bartlett hounded me all day trying to get me to agree. Mr. Hansen said that if the deal fell through, it would be my fault and they would have to let me go. They also said that if I told anyone about what was going on, I would be fired. I tried to tell you as much as I could. I knew that if you knew the whole story, you would do something crazy and I would lose my job. On Tuesday, I told them I wouldn't do it, and they asked me to think again. Then Mr. Hansen told me that the company was short over $100,000, and that if there was an audit, it would look like I had been embezzling money from the company for the last few years. Jack told me that I would end up going to jail. He told me that if I did everything he asked, I would get the promised money and a promotion, but if I didn't cooperate, there would be an audit, and I would be charged with embezzlement. In the end, I had to agree to do what he wanted. Jack and Mr. Bartlett talked to me every day to make sure I wouldn't let them down. They kept telling me I was doing the right thing and tried to convince me that you would understand if you knew how important this deal was. You can't believe I could think what you're doing is okay, Fred said. You should have told me everything. I would have found a way out for you. I know that now. When I decided to go through with it, I felt a little better. But I felt so guilty about what I was doing to you. You have to understand that I was terribly afraid of going to jail. But I had to take the risk. The problem was that you came home earlier than expected. When I got back to the party, I saw you with a microphone trying to get everyone's attention. I was so scared. I had no idea what you were up to, and I didn't know if there was anything I could do to stop you. I couldn't believe you said I was pregnant. I didn't say you were pregnant, he said. I said we were having a baby. You weren't pregnant yet, but that was our plan, wasn't it? Well, yes, but what? Are we or aren't we going to start a family? He asked. Yes, we are going to. I'm going to stop taking birth control pills tomorrow, and then we can start. I was so stressed out by the whole situation that I wasn't thinking straight. Anyway, you gave your little speech and basically ended my career at DC and H and probably ruined the deal with National Pharmaceutical. Fred said, so basically, you're telling me that Bartlett and Hansen coerced you and Benson to make a business deal. But I blew it by catching you. After all, the only reason you didn't entertain Benson is because I blew it with my little speech. So, have you summed it up? Yes, but I don't blame you for what you did. I understand why you did it, I said. Oh good, then you forgive me for trying to keep my wife from having fun with another man, Fred said wryly. That's not what I meant. I know you had every right to react the way you did, and I have no right to be upset with you. I'm upset at myself. I should have told you everything from the beginning. Do you think you can ever forgive me? I asked. It depends on the circumstances, said Fred. Is that all? You've told me everything I need to know about what's been going on? Yes, I've told you everything. I love you and I can't bear the thought that I might lose you because of this mess I got myself into, I said. Well, things don't look as bad as they did at first, Fred said. I just need to answer a couple questions and then we can put this behind us. Okay. What kind of questions? I was beginning to hope that I could save my marriage, and that was all I cared about at that moment. As far as Fred knew, I hadn't cheated on him. I was going to, but only under duress. He didn't know about my affair with Jack. Things were working out just fine. I found this in the trash the other day and it's full, Fred said, and threw my birth control pills on the coffee table. You threw out all your birth control pills last week, but not only did you not tell me about it, but you tried to make me believe you were still taking them. Just 5 minutes ago you said you'd stop taking them tomorrow. Can you explain that to me? I was stunned. What could I say to get out of this mess? You're right. I did stop taking the pills, I said. I was planning to let you get pregnant and then surprise you. I know how much you want to start a family, so I thought it would be a nice surprise when I told you about it. That plan would only work if you and I were doing it. But the last time we made love was the day before you stopped taking the pill, he said. I was just so upset about what Mr. Bartlett and Jack wanted me to do that I wasn't in the mood to do it at that time, I replied. Did you know that last night was the most fertile night of your cycle? He asked. How did he know that? It wasn't true. I had only written it down on the calendar to fool Jack. There was no way I could explain it to Fred. No, I didn't know about it. I had too many other things on my mind to think about it, I said. One more question, Cathy, I began. How long have you been having fun with that rat bastard Hansen? What? He knows everything. How could he? No more lies. I know you've been keeping track of your menstrual cycle and marked last night as a day in your day planner. He wanted you to get pregnant, didn't he? I started crying and couldn't find the words to explain my behavior. Fred said, I saw you standing in the living room. I saw Hansen kissing your belly the way a man often kisses the belly of the woman who is carrying his child, or, in this case, will carry it. Did you think I'd be stupid enough to let you have his baby and make me think it was mine? Or were you planning on leaving me all along? You spent last night with him, didn't you? I couldn't answer his questions. I couldn't find the words to defend myself. I could tell Fred that I hadn't spent the night with Jack, but what would that change? He had seen me with Jack at our house. Fred left the room for a few minutes, and when he returned, he was carrying his suitcases. I jumped up from my chair and ran to him. Please don't leave me. I love you. I don't love Jack. I told you he sent me through the blackmail. I had no choice but to do what he asked, I begged. Why didn't you just keep taking birth control pills and lie to Jack about it? You certainly had no problem lying to me. I guess I'd have to believe what you told that rat bastard more than anything you've said to me lately, he said. I forgot to tell you that last night when I was watching you and that asshole, I heard you say to him, I love you. So where does that leave me? I don't love him. If I get pregnant, I'll have an abortion. I love you. Please, you have to believe me, I said. I don't know why I said that. I was sure that Jack couldn't get me pregnant, but I was saying everything that came into my head, trying to stop Fred from leaving. No, I don't. As for the baby, don't have an abortion because of me. I collapsed on the floor and lay like that for over an hour. When I finally forced myself to get up, I went to bed and slept until 10 o'clock Sunday morning. Sunday, I spent a lot of time crying. Fred was gone, and I knew there was nothing I could say to him that would bring him back. The full truth would make him hate me even more, and I knew that telling Fred more lies wasn't an option either. It wasn't until Sunday night that I began to think seriously about what I should do. I was already thinking about taking a sick day on Monday so I wouldn't have to face my coworkers at work. But I changed my mind. I decided to go and tell people that Fred and I had a fight the Friday before the party, that he got drunk and said all kinds of things that he wanted to hurt me. Then I would talk to Jack and find out what kind of relationship I was in with him. I hoped that Jack would find a way to salvage the deal with National and not blame me for what happened Friday night. Jack said he loved me, so I would have to play on that. Monday morning, I went to the office determined to act like everything was fine, but it wasn't. Very wrong. No one wanted to talk to me. Most people wouldn't even look at me, and a few people were whispering about me behind my back. When I got to my office, I closed the door and sat down at my desk, resting my head on my hands. Had the scene with Fred at the party turned everyone against me? I wondered how I would ever regain the respect of the other employees if they believed what Fred had told them in his little speech. That morning, I waited until 10 o'clock and called Jack's office. His secretary informed me that Jack had gone to Mr. Benson's hotel for a meeting. This was the first good news I had heard in a while. If Jack was meeting with Mr. Benson, that meant the deal was still on. I hoped Jack would still take me with him. At least I'd have a career. As soon as the thought crossed my mind, I was filled with self-loathing. It was thoughts like that that had cost me my marriage. It was at that moment that I realized I had to change something in my life, but I didn't know what yet. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I got a call from the receptionist in the lobby. She said that William Jefferson and Veronica Peters from the FBI wanted me to come and talk to them. I didn't like this turn of events. I assumed they wanted to talk to me about my denunciation of the CEO and president of DC and H. All my previous conversations on this topic had been over the phone, and I had Jack to help me with answers. Coming face to face with the FBI was beyond me. As I was leaving the office, I was approached by Mimi Sanders. I hoped she would talk to me, but then wished she hadn't. "Ta-da! Did you really think you could work your way to the top? I guess if you have a baby with Mr. Hansen, you'll be the next president of the company," Mimi said, and walked away. I was too stunned to respond to her comment. As I looked around, I realized that several people had heard Mimi's words and were looking at me as if I had been murdered. I quickly made my way to the elevators and pressed the down button a few times, hoping it would speed the elevator up to the 4th floor. I desperately wanted to get away from the unfriendly faces that were now watching me. When the elevator finally arrived, I hid in a corner until the door closed, hoping no one else would come in with me. When I was in the lobby, the receptionist pointed out 2 FBI agents, and I walked over to them and introduced myself. Both agents stood up. Agent Peters stood in front of me, and Agent Jefferson stood behind me. Agent Peters was the first to speak. "Mrs. Alpin, we would like you to come with us to our office. We have some questions we'd like you to answer," she said. Now I was getting scared. "Am I under arrest?" I asked. "No," Agent Peters said. "We just need your help to clear up some questions." "Can you tell me what this is about?" I asked. "We'd prefer to wait and discuss it in our office," Agent Peters said. I knew I had the right to refuse to go with them. After all, they said I wasn't under arrest, and they didn't show me any warrant, but I knew I had no choice. I had to go with them. Agent Jefferson drove the car, and Agent Peters sat in the back seat with me, but there was no conversation. I was in such a panicked state that I almost didn't realize how I got to the FBI office in downtown Indianapolis. When we pulled up to the building, both agents led me to the elevator, and Agent Jefferson pressed the 7th floor button. During the ride up, I hoped one of the agents would say something to reassure me that I wasn't in some kind of trouble, but none of them spoke. On the 7th floor, I was led to a small, windowless room and asked to sit down. Agents Peters and Jefferson left me there alone. I was quickly getting the impression that this was not going to be a friendly interview. I sat in the room alone for 10 minutes, and my fear was building with each passing second. Finally, the door opened, and Agent Peters walked in, and with her was Mr. Benson. I was stunned. What the hell was he doing in there? "Hello, Mrs. Alpin," he said. "Hello, Mr. Benson." "Actually, this is Special Agent Mark Walker," he said. My heart raced so hard I thought I was going to pass out. "Oh my God, what's going on?" I exclaimed. "Relax, Mrs. Alpin," he said. "We're not following you." "I don't understand. What's going on?" I asked. "Let me explain," Special Agent Walker said. "When you went to the SEC with suspicions about the activities of Mr. Ward, the CEO, and Mr. Salter, the president of DC&H, they became very interested and brought the FBI into the investigation. We quickly realized that the charges you were making against Mr. Ward and Mr. Salter were accurate and began building a case against them that we could take to a grand jury. One thing troubled us during the investigation. How was it that the manager of the accounting department in Indianapolis could have so much information about Mr. Ward's and Mr. Salter's activities? We checked you out and found that you had never worked in the New York office and had never met either Mr. Ward or Mr. Salter." About that time, the real Mr. Benson contacted the FBI office in Indianapolis and said he had some concerns about the way DC&H was doing business here. That's when we learned that Mr. Hansen had moved here and was running the national pharmaceutical deal. We knew he was working closely with Ward and Salter in New York, and our investigation showed that he was spending a lot of time with you. I thought, geez, does everyone really know that I was entertaining Jack? When we saw a picture starting to emerge, we decided to run an operation here. When Mr. Hansen offered you as a gift to secure my signature on the contract, I had almost enough evidence on him, but then your husband intervened and foiled our plans for Friday night. Lucky for us, your friend Hansen didn't back out of the deal so easily. He called me on Saturday and offered me a big payday if I would sign the contract. Mr. Hansen came to my hotel room this morning, handed me $100,000, and I handcuffed him, Agent Walker said. I had nothing to do with that transaction. I only found out about Jack offering me to you as a gift after he did. As for snitching on Mr. Ward and Mr. Salter, I only did what Jack told me to do. I didn't think I was breaking any laws. I knew what Jack wanted me to do to you was wrong, but he promised he would take care of me if I did, I said. How was he going to take care of you? He promised that when he became president of the company or CEO, which he would manage, he would make me vice president, and I would get a big bonus, I said. Did you ever think he might be lying to you? No, I never thought he might do that. Are you saying he was lying? No. I'm just wondering if you ever considered that possibility, he said. Am I in big trouble? I asked. Well, you may have lost your marriage. You're probably going to lose your job. And after Friday's spectacle, you probably lost the respect of the people you worked with. Don't you think that's big trouble? He asked in response. I mean, am I in trouble with the FBI? No, we have the people we need. We just need you to fill in some gaps. I need you to explain how you contacted Mr. Hansen and tell me everything he wanted you to do for him. I spent the next 3 hours telling Agents Peters and Walker about my sordid relationship with Jack and how he coached me when I went to the SEC to snitch on Mr. Ward and Mr. Salter. I told them about how Jack insisted I had to take it up with Mr. Benson to save the deal. By the time they drove me back to get my car, I was exhausted and depressed. That night, I returned home and began to think seriously about what I was going to do. On Tuesday morning, I called the head of HR and quit the company. He made no attempt to talk me out of quitting. Apparently, everyone knew about me. The next day, I hired an attorney and told him everything that had happened. I knew that Fred would file for divorce and I would need a lawyer for that, and I thought I might need a lawyer to deal with the fallout from the mess at DC and H. This turned out to be the smartest thing I've done in the last 6 months. Over the next few months, my attorney contacted DC&H's legal department and told them how Jack had used his position to get me to have an affair with him and that he was using me to do his dirty work, which was inappropriate behavior for a vice president of the company. He told DC&H that I was going to sue them, and they quickly offered to settle the case. They knew they didn't need the extra notoriety. After legal fees, I ended up with almost $500,000. When the divorce papers came, I asked the attorney to include my DC&H settlement amount in the community property so that Fred would receive half of that amount, as well as half of the proceeds from the sale of the house. After the divorce, Fred moved to California to start his own detective agency. I decided that I needed to get out of Indianapolis. I had lost almost all of my friends, and one of the few that remained told me that Carol Studwell had told everyone at work about what Jack and I had been up to. I couldn't believe she had betrayed my trust like that. Then I remembered how she kept pouring me scotch to keep me talking. I guess in a way I deserved it. The other thing my friend told me was more disturbing. She said there was a rumor going around the office that I had stayed with Jack for a month after the party while he was trying to get pregnant. It was a malicious lie. The only time I saw Jack after the Christmas party was when I testified against him at the trial. After that, I moved to Columbus, Ohio. Connie Bradshaw, my former college roommate, had moved there a few years earlier, and she told me that the local community college was looking for someone to teach some business courses. It had been 3 years since I had moved to Columbus, and I was finally starting to feel better. I heard that Fred remarried, but I don't know who to. I hope he's happy, and his new wife isn't as stupid as me. I recently started dating a very nice man. He's a professor at Ohio State University. I was working on my doctoral dissertation there, and he was teaching one of my courses. We have been dating for about 4 months now, and things are going very well. I'm hoping that when I get my degree, I'll be able to teach business ethics at the university level. I think I have learned enough from my own experience to definitely qualify for the subject. My goal in writing this story is to simply and honestly tell anyone who is interested what I did. I have no excuses. You can judge my actions for yourself, but please be kind when you think of me. What I did was horrible, but what I went through for it is even worse. I lost my husband, my self-respect and the respect of my friends, my beautiful home and my job. Some of you may think that I deserve even more punishment. You may be right, but I am only human. I made a mistake and I paid for it. Now it's time to put the past behind me and move on. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.